go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
This is the story of Dracula, a creature who destroys all whom he touches. Dracula the terrifying, the feared, who sleeps in the tombs of the dead by day and arises at night to inflict his terror upon the innocent and the unsuspecting.
Oh, you must help me. You must. You're my only hope. You must.
I'll help you. I promise.
Please try and understand. This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula.
How do you destroy a fiend who has so far proven himself indestructible? Those who come to end his reign of terror stay to become his victims.
Castle Dracula is somewhere here in Klausenberg. Will you tell me how I get there?
You ordered a meal, sir. As an innkeeper, it's my duty to serve you. When you've eaten, I ask you to go and leave us in peace.
This is the doctor who dares to challenge the vampire Dracula. This is the anguished man who fears for the lives of his beloved, the girl who is his sister, and the one that is his wife. Dracula, the bedeviled master of all that is evil.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your mission commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen. And on this episode of Planet 8, your intrepid crew is back with our all-video format here on YouTube. We'll be discussing Hammer Dracula films, specifically films that featured and starred Christopher Lee. Straight away, we're going to kick it up to the satellite. Karen, if you could give our listeners a little background on why we selected this topic in the middle of summer and where we're going to possibly go with this in this episode.
Sure, nothing says summer like Dracula.
Exactly. It's so warm and inviting. Well, blood is very warm. But actually, we owe this one to Bob. Bob really came up with this. And, you could say there might have been some inspiration out there in the universe because of a couple of things that happened towards the end of May here. One of them being World Dracula Day on May 26th. This is an international celebration of the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula on May 26th back in 1897. So, of course, without that, we would not have Dracula as we know and love him. And then the second thing being the birthday of the great Christopher Lee. As Larry mentioned, we're looking at Hammer and specifically Christopher Lee as Dracula. And Christopher Lee was born on May 27th, so a day after World Dracula Day, kind of eerie. He was born in 1922, May 27th. So Dracula, the book, Dracula as portrayed by the great Christopher Lee, all kind of happening at the end of May, and maybe providing some great inspiration for our chief engineer to say, hey, we should do Dracula. And we said, sure, why not? We love those movies. So that's why.
This episode is hitting the streets on June 8th, which means
July 8th. Oh, June 8th. You're right.
June 8th.
Sorry.
So that means that in podcast time, yesterday was my birthday.
So we'll also be celebrating Bob's birthday.
In the Dracula vein, no pun intended.
So a very happy birthday to Bob in the future. Please feel free to.
After the episode.
Yeah.
Happy belated early.
Belated early birthday, yeah.
This is
I
the
hope
problem
you had
with
fun.
time travel.
So what are you going to be doing on your birthday yesterday? Anyway.
Watching Hammer Dracula films. No, but well.
We'll see what we come up with next. But yeah, so that's why we're doing this here. We each focus specifically on one movie, and we'll kind of weave our way through those films here in this episode. So Larry, do you want to get us started?
I do. Thank you very much, my dear Walker. And, you know, if we're to be absolutely honest and truthful, sometimes we just flip a coin to decide what we're going to do next. This had some rhyme and reason to it. There's some stuff that we've done in the past, and most certainly coming forward, that it's going to be fun. But yeah. So I had the good fortune of watching the first Dracula film that was 1958. And so one of the things I think we should probably share with you guys, especially some of our listeners and watchers who haven't watched, I don't know why you wouldn't have watched these Hammer horror movies. If you've only ever been exposed to like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, or as Bob had shared with us in some of our texts while we were discussing this, Leslie Neal's version of Dracula.
Right, your favorite Dracula? Yes, Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah. But, you know, there was a certain cadence and way that Bela Lugosi portrayed Dracula. And he did it the two times, the Dracula film and then the Abbott and Costello. Now, he did the Broadway, you know, production for quite some time, but in cinema, and it's brilliant. Hopefully you've seen Bela Lugosi's Dracula. But, you know, a lot of the horror that was portrayed in the film was alluded to, but at the time it was like just crazy. No one had ever seen anything like that, you know, the dead rising and you know, vampirism and all that stuff. What Hammer did, you know, what was it, 30 some odd years later, 20 some odd years later, it was in color, and it was very, for the time again, graphic. One of the things I'll get into that really strikes me, Christopher Lee is a very tall person, and the way that he would run down the stairs in a fit of anger was mesmerizing to me as a kid, and even rewatching these, because I don't know about you guys, I haven't seen this for at least 10 years.
It had been a while.
Yeah, so to go back in. So just to kind of fill you in on some of the history on this, Dracula, 1958, British Gothic horror, and Hammer did it so well for a lot of their films, not just the Dracula movies. And it was written by Jimmy Sangster, based on obviously Bram Stoker's novel. Hammer horror films starring Christopher Lee as Count Dracula, and we shouldn't forget Peter Cushing as Dr. Van Helsing. Phenomenal job. I mean, both of these guys are just so believable, such good actors. Bob and I were kind of going back and forth because I'm like, oh, I'm going to watch Dracula. He's like, well, isn't that also Horror of Dracula? And so it is, both titles are out there for this film. It's the 1958 version, though.
Yeah, I think the U.S. had the Horror of Dracula.
That was the yeah. So I mean, basically, it follows, the story of Dracula with Jonathan Harker, goes to the castle, but in this version, he's confronted by this woman who he doesn't realize is a vampire, and she's asking for his help, basically, like she's being held against her will. And at first Dracula's like, oh please, Mr. Harker, we're gonna have you help me with whatever paperwork and stuff.
He was a librarian, right?
Kind of, sort of. It sounded like he was almost like a he was like archiving work for Dracula and stuff like that, which made me think, maybe a librarian. He's friends with Van Helsing, though. And so Van Helsing had been working with Harker to bring down Dracula, right?
Yeah, they took a lot of liberties with the plot from the book.
Which, in some cases, you don't want to watch the same story by different actors.
Sometimes
you do.
It was fine.
Yeah.
It was just interesting how they changed it.
It kind of threw me for a minute, because I'm like, wait a minute, what? Okay. But it worked. One of the things that I appreciate very quickly getting out of the Dracula universe was the Sony's latest version of Spider-Man with Tom
Holland.
Yeah. And they didn't bother to go into, he got bit by a spider, just jumped into it. But at that point, everybody should know who Spider-Man is. So with this, everybody knows who Dracula is. And he goes after Jonathan Harker. And unfortunately, fortunately, Jonathan keeps a diary. And there's this little, there's, I don't know if it was the Virgin Mary, but there's a little alcove with the saint in it and some flowers outside of the castle. And he puts his journal in there. And he'd gotten bitten. The woman, came at him, and Dracula pushes her away, and he, unfortunately, Jonathan does not survive. But he writes in the journal, "I've been bitten," And so it's so well acted, because and we always talk about the lack of CGI and there's a lot of visual effects. So when Peter Cushing goes to look for Jonathan, he goes to the local tavern, and they treat him like crap, But Peter Cushing's like, no, I'm here to do this, that, and the other. And, if there is no great evil, why do you have cloves of garlic up in your tavern and stuff like that? So, there's some back and forth, and there's a little bit of a story with Lucy, and, it's under a different, because Jonathan's married to someone. Sorry, excuse me. We can't mute our mic when we're on camera,
I can.
Lucy Homewood. Yeah. And her photos are gone, because he had pictures of her set up, but Dracula kind of had a plan, and Van Helsing tries to stop, and he's successful. One of the great things I was looking forward to these films is how Dracula dies and how he's resurrected. And we didn't cover all the films. We each took on one. So there's 3. What is there, a total of 6 or 7 Dracula films?
I think not counting Brides of Dracula, but the ones with Christopher Lee would be Dracula, Dracula Prince of Darkness, Taste the Blood of Dracula, Dracula's Risen from the Grave. Then does it go to
1972.
72.
And then there's Satanic Rites of Dracula. So there's 6, I believe, unless I forgot one.
You don't want to count Legend of the 7 Golden Vampires?
Well, again, that's not Christopher.
Well, Christopher Lee's not in it.
Peter Cushing is in that one, though, right?
Cushing is not Lee. Yeah. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
But it's fun to see.
6. So
yeah, for me it was fun to see how he gets resurrected. So in this version, there's this wonderful epic battle between Dracula and Van Helsing, and Van Helsing, he almost gets choked out, but at the last minute, the sun shines through, and he's able to tear the curtain down. Oh, and he uses the cross too to, Dracula, and he can't.
Oh, he's got 2 candlesticks, and
he makes the cross out of the 2 candlesticks.
It's always amazing to see Peter Cushing with like action music. You always think of him as an English gentleman.
Yeah, he's a wiry little guy, but he handles himself well.
He does indeed. It was a lot of fun to watch them. They're such good actors. And so, the sun gets Dracula, he turns to dust, and cue credits. That's basically the movie in a nutshell. One of the things I found interesting, and I was trying to see what the actor's name is, but at some point they're chasing Dracula because he's in the carriage and, trying to escape. And there's this comic bit where this guy puts the gate down, or I don't know what it's called, the banister, and they run through it, and the guy does like, ooh, like these crazy little things. And then it gets back to being serious again. And it kind of threw me. I mean, it wasn't like haha Benny Hill comedy, but it was kind of like zany. But anyway, yeah.
Zany madcap humor.
I know, in a weird place to put it. It's towards the end of the movie.
Like they often did that with sort of the townsfolk. They would have them be sort of these caricatures that brought in humor to lighten up some of the I mean, these were, like you said, they felt like very graphic movies at the time.
Indeed. And it's interesting because they as the films go on, they kind of set up like, the whole Gothic take. There's always going to be the castle. There's always going to be a carriage, drawn by horses. There's always going to be, the local tavern. There's always going to be someone who put the garlic away or didn't, lock the window or, whatever. I'll tell you though, it was also very, they weren't overdoing it with the blood, but they definitely, with the stake in the heart, blood would manifest.
Oh.
So, yeah, that's all I got.
Okay.
Who's next?
That would be me.
Yes.
So the movie I watched and will speak about is Dracula, Prince of Darkness. This is from 1966. And this is Christopher Lee's second appearance as Dracula. Now, technically not the second Dracula movie from Hammer. They did make a second film called Brides of Dracula, but it's kind of a cheat because Dracula's not really in that movie and it doesn't have Christopher Lee in it. So I think we sort of just decided, that's not really not really a Dracula movie. We're not really going to
count that one.
Yeah, let's just
it's kind of like the Universal Dracula's daughter.
Yeah, it's kind of a, I think it has, it has good qualities, but it's like, is it a Dracula? I don't know.
Oh yeah, definitely. But
yeah. So this is a rather interesting one, I think, because while it does have Lee, it doesn't have Cushing. Cushing was off doing Doctor Who. But I really enjoy the replacement for the Van Helsing character. Instead of Van Helsing, we have Father Sandor. Father Sandor is this sort of gruff, stocky monk who runs around the countryside, chastising villagers and shooting deer, and generally sort of, chastising everybody. played by Andrew Keir. And Andrew Keir also, he was in a lot of different films, but for the Hammer Connection, and he may have been in more than one other film, but I know he was in Quatermass and the Pit, which is probably my favorite Hammer film of all time. And he does a really great job in the role. I would have loved to have seen more adventures with Father Sandor, taking down vampires and hunting the undead. I thought he was a really cool character that, could have given Van Helsing a run for his money. Maybe they could have teamed up. That would have been cool. This film is also really notorious because Christopher Lee, Dracula, does not speak at all.
Right.
In this film. And there's two stories that have gone around. One, Christopher Lee said that he read the script and he went into the production offices and he said, if you think I'm going to speak any of these lines, you are sadly mistaken. And he just refused to say any of the lines because he thought it was so poorly written. Now, the other side of the story is that Jimmy Sangster, who wrote the script but used a pseudonym in the movie for whatever reasons, you can take your guess. Jimmy Sangster says, no, I never gave Dracula any dialogue because we felt that he was more of a menacing, animalistic, mystical figure. So we just didn't feel like he needed any dialogue. So, there may be one side may be right, the other maybe it's down the middle. I don't know, but it's kind of odd that he doesn't speak. I think in some scenes it's really effective, but in other scenes it just seems kind of weird. Here he is all dressed up in his gentlemanly outfit and everything, and he's kind of just growling and, hissing. He does come across very much, like an animal. He doesn't seem to have that intellect that you connect with Dracula. I always think of Dracula as being very demonic. And there's not a whole lot of that in the film. But, it seems like Christopher Lee would get kind of pissed off about different roles and do whatever he wanted. So this was the way he decided to play it.
Well, in most of the movies I've seen, Dracula movies with Christopher Lee, he doesn't have a lot of dialogue.
Right.
He'll issue commands or whatever, but it's really not too extensive.
Yeah, and that apparently started with this film. And, there's with some of the other films, he also has remarked about his displeasure with the scripts. So, but he was happy enough to take the money.
Oh, yeah.
So, and he does have such an amazing presence. So even without speaking, like Larry said, he's physically impressive. He's a big man and he's, very physical. He's a very physical Dracula. So many other Draculas, Bela Lugosi and others who followed him, they're much more restrained in their movements and things. This is a Dracula that runs around and leaps and does all these things,
Well, like I said, him coming down those stairs, he's always like upset, and it's just like whoosh. It's this, like a ballet. You're just like, whoa. This is the film. It had been like 10 years or something since Van Helsing vanquished Dracula, right? And this is the priest with the rifle.
Yes.
He reminds me of Sala from Indiana Jones.
I can sort of see
cadence.
That. Yeah.
Well, I love the way that they resurrected Dracula in this one. This was the one where they hung the guy.
Well,
sorry.
So just in case anybody hasn't seen it or it's been a long time, essentially the story is it's been 10 years since the first film. And so Dracula's gone. These four English folks come, two couples, two brothers and their wives. And they're on holiday, right? Why they chose to go on holiday, in essentially Transylvania, I don't know. Anyway, people have different ideas of what's cool. And we start out in this, they start out with a prologue from the first film. They show how Dracula was killed. And
that's right.
Yeah. And then they start with the couples, and they're, in this tavern, and then they're like, talking about their plans. And then Father Sandor comes in, and he sees the garlic hung up, and he's like, you guys are still afraid of the boogeyman. It's been 10 years. And the couple says, well, we're headed to Carlsbad. And then all of a sudden he gets very serious, and he tells them, don't go to Carlsbad. Whatever you want to do something else. Don't go to Carlsbad, and whatever you do, don't go to the castle. So what do these people do? They wind up in the castle. So they wind up in the castle, and the whole time, one of the women, the older woman of these two couples, Helen, she's always telling them, she's the only one amongst the four of them that says, I don't think we should go to Carl. I don't think we should go to the castle. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do that. She's very, very rigid. And she's like, we shouldn't be doing all this stuff.
That's the one with the funny look on her face, like throughout the whole, like.
She's like very restrained, right? Very depressed. Things change for Helen real quick. So they get to the castle, and then, dinner is all set up, and they're like, what's going on? And all of a sudden this creepy dude pops up. He's the butler, Clove, the butler. And he's like, oh, my master's been expecting you. And they're like, oh, well, that's fabulous. Can we meet him? No, he's dead. But, he wanted to maintain hospitality for anybody who passed through. And they're like, oh, that's great. And again, Helen is like, this is crazy. We shouldn't be here. And everybody's like, oh, you're just uptight. Just relax. Everybody goes to bed. Middle of the night, noises. Helen's husband, Charles, goes out to look, and there's Clove dragging this huge trunk down the hallway and down the stairs. And he's like, well, that's odd. Let me go see what's up. And she's like, don't leave. And, oh, Helen, everything's going to be fine. And then he says, everything will be fine in the morning. And she says, there'll be no morning for us. So then we get to the part you're thinking of, Larry, which is a really, like, for a Hammer film even, it was ghastly. So Charles goes down into whatever, the basement, down the stairs. Goes down the stairs. He's looking for Clove. Clove comes up behind him. Well, he looks around and he finds this big tomb. So he's like, wow, that's a really big tomb. What's that doing here? Dude, get out of there. No, they never get out, right? They just like look around. Oh, a big tomb in the basement. And then he finds this urn, and he's like, oh, I wonder what the urn's for. And then Clove stabs him in the back, pulls him around, and like,
Now, wait, Walker, was there like a pair of shoes and a fresh pressed tux?
Right,
like, oh.
Exactly. Dracula's suit is all laid out too. The cape. With the red
was it
line.
really?
It's like,
that's hilarious.
So and then Clove has this pulley system. He hangs poor Charles up above the tomb. He puts Dracula's ashes from the urn in the tomb, cuts his throat, and this is the part that everybody remembers. He cuts his throat from behind, and then you just see this bright red. Now it's comically red, right? Because blood doesn't look bright red, but to see it spurting out into the tomb was really like, I can remember as a kid. This is why when I was a little kid, I had a hard time watching Hammer movies like alone or late at night, because I always get really freaked out. And a lot of times I didn't really see these movies till I was like in my late teens.
I thought I was diseased because whenever I'd get a cut, my blood would never look like movie blood. And I'm like, is there something wrong with me?
Why, yes.
So yeah, this is the way they brought him back in this one. It is interesting, the different ways they bring him back. So apparently, even if Dracula is just a pile of ashes, if you pour blood on it, and it was kind of cool the way his body started shaping in the ashes.
It kind of reminded me of the bubbles from the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? It kind of like started like foaming,
it was like a brown foam, and then you started seeing structures and everything. It was kind of cool.
Now, after they bled him into the urn, did they pick up Dracula's suit and like drop it in there? So when he forms,
you would think that would be, you know, then he wouldn't have the indignity of running around naked. Yeah, we didn't really get to see that part of it. But then, so then poor Helen, Clove goes back upstairs and he says, "Oh, your husband, please come quickly." And she's, "Oh," she goes downstairs. And of course, there's the man, Dracula. He's revived and ready to drink. And so poor Helen becomes his first victim. And then from there, you know, it becomes this situation where the two younger folk, who are Alan and Diana, trying to escape from Dracula's castle. And at this point, Helen has gone from repressed to quite the opposite. Now that she has been vamped up, she literally vamped up by Dracula. She's completely expressing herself now as a woman. Well, it's an interesting undercurrent of these films, isn't it? That like sort of the vampirism and sexuality and everything, right? So,
I like the way you said she got vamped up, because one of the things I remember was just the discomfort, and it wasn't terror, but she was definitely uncomfortable and afraid that something was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And after the transformation, she was like, "Meow, meow." You know?
Exactly. So yeah, they wind up fleeing. To make a long story short, they get hooked back up with Father Sandor. They go to the monastery where he's at. Poor Diana had been injured, but she didn't get vamped up. And from there, it's a matter of trying to prevent Dracula. Dracula is determined now to go after Diana, so they're trying to keep him out of the monastery. But there's a character in the monastery who had been a former human servant of Dracula. So this guy is sort of like a Renfield character, and I don't think there was a Renfield character in the earlier Dracula film. Yeah,
kind of reminded me of Geppetto. He looked like Geppetto, Pinocchio's father. Kind of threw me off.
Oh yeah. So that guy is the one who winds up letting Dracula into the monastery, and there's a really, talking about eroticism again in the films, there's a really weird scene where Dracula gets into Diana's room and he bares his chest and uses a nail to cut his chest so he's bleeding. And then he tries to get Diana to drink the blood and she gets all googly eyed. She's all, oh, but fortunately is, you know, again, saved from Dracula. And then more hijinks ensue. They start heading back to the castle with Father Sandor and Alan chasing. And we see another novel way to defeat Dracula, which is he's standing on ice. And Father Sandor winds up shooting. He winds up shooting the ice all around Dracula. Dracula is bobbing on the ice, and then he slips and he falls in the water. So I guess the flowing water, something about purity in the water. And anyway, that takes care of Dracula, which is slightly anticlimactic, but you know, it works. And that was the end for him.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I forgot to mention was the contacts that they used.
Oh, yeah.
Either that or they put battery acid in Christopher Lee's eyes to give him bloodshot.
Yeah. Rub your eyes. Whole lot.
They were incredibly red and
very effective, you know, especially he's not talking that much, but he gives you that, blah, you know.
And, you know, when they were making this movie, I was looking up some stuff in a book, which I'll share later. They were also filming Rasputin the Mad Monk. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of, because they were able to use some of the same sets, like the monastery and some of the other things. It was sort of a cost-saving measure that they used even some of the same cast in both films. So they were able to kind of shave some of the costs off of the production for both films while they were doing this. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for this one. I really enjoyed it, though. Of course, I love seeing Peter Cushing, but I thought it was interesting to introduce a different adversary for Dracula. And some of the other elements they brought in that were kind of reminiscent of the original novel, like the human servants that I don't think we really saw much of before. So those were both really interesting parts that they put into this film.
Excellent.
Mr. Bob.
Take us over to Bob.
Yes. Well, I was trying to pick between Taste the Blood of Dracula and Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Taste the Blood of Dracula came right after Karen's film, Dracula, Prince of Darkness. But I chose Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. And it's funny because I looked online and there was a plot synopsis for it. And the plot synopsis said, vampire, in parentheses, Christopher Lee, bites women and falls on a sharp object. And that sums the whole thing up perfectly right there. That's pretty much the plot. But one thing I noticed, like watching, because I watched Dracula, I watched this, and I also watched Dracula AD 1972. And it seems like a running theme is Dracula's always out for vengeance. He's always trying, like Van Helsing is after him, so he goes after Van Helsing's family, or somebody else is after, he goes after them. So just leave the guy alone. And maybe everything would be fine, but no, they never do. So in Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, which he doesn't actually, we'll get into that in a minute, but it's like Dracula has risen from the stream is basically what it is. But it starts out with an altar boy going into the church, and he looks up in the ceiling, he sees blood dripping from the ceiling. So he goes upstairs, which is basically the bell loft, and he sees blood dripping from the bell. And then suddenly this woman's corpse just falls out hanging from the bell, and she's bleeding from her neck, and he gets pretty traumatized.
Oh yeah, I'd imagine.
So then it comes back a year later, and obviously that was when Dracula was around. But then it goes a year later, and during that year were the events in Taste the Blood of Dracula. So then it comes back in a year, and the Monsignor comes to visit the town, and he wants to see how the church is running and how everything's going. And he finds the altar boy, who is now mute from his shocking experience. And he gets him to take him to, he's like, where's the priest? Or where's your priest? So he takes him to the local bar, and the priest is in there just drinking away because he's lost his religion, he's lost his beliefs, and he just sits there and drinks all day. Nobody wants to go to the church because the shadow of Dracula's castle touches the church when the sun comes up. So the Monsignor is basically states, well, Dracula was killed a year ago, so why are you still afraid? So he decides he's going to go up to Dracula's castle and perform an exorcism. And this may all just be show for the people in the village to allay their fears, so they'll all return to church and go to church again. So he takes the priest, and the two of them go up the hill, or go up a mountain basically, to get to Dracula's castle. And the priest, he's been drinking himself under the table for a year, so he can't quite make it all the way up the mountain. So he stops about halfway, and the Monsignor goes the rest of the way. He gets up there, stands outside the doors of Dracula's castle, says a few prayers, some incantations, what have you, and then has a huge cross that he took from the church, and he just sticks it right between the chains and the door handles and basically hangs it on the door. So when he hangs it on the door, there's suddenly thunder, which scares the priest, and he jumps up and he falls over this rock, lands on the rocks below, and hits his head. So, of course, what happens when you hit your head on rocks? You bleed. So he's bleeding onto the rock, and the blood goes along the rock and over to a frozen stream and just happens to hit a crack in the ice, which drips it down into Dracula's mouth. Dracula's right there in the bottom of the tree, nice and peaceful, but the blood basically trickles into his mouth, and he's back up. He's awake. And he also bites the priest and takes him over as his servant. So the Monsignor comes down, doesn't see the priest, figures he's already gone back to town. He goes down and he goes to the bar, and he asks, he says, well, Dracula's taken care of. He's been exorcised. His spirit is gone, and I'm going back to my place. So he figures the priest is behind him somewhere. He'll show up. So he goes back where he lives with his late brother's wife. So his sister-in-law, and their niece, his niece, who is played by Veronica Carlson. Yeah. So basically, Dracula goes up to his castle with the priest, and he sees the cross on the door. Who did this thing? He's like just furious. And so the priest, eventually tells him it was the Monsignor. So, like I said, he's out for vengeance. He goes heading down. So he talks the priest into showing him where the Monsignor is. And he sees that Monsignor has this beautiful niece. And so,
of course,
I'm getting that niece. So she, in the meantime, has a boyfriend who's a baker, and he lives in the local bakery. And that just happens to be above where the priest basically finds a coffin, dumps the body, puts it down there with some dirt from Dracula's castle. So Dracula is basically sleeping in the basement for now.
Under the bakery?
Under the bakery.
Man, that would drive me crazy. Smelling all that bread and stuff.
Well, they're not baking blood. Other than that, he doesn't care.
Yeah, I guess he doesn't care.
So basically, as time goes on, he does end up biting and kidnapping the Monsignor's niece. And so the Monsignor calls Paul to basically come and help search for the niece. And so Paul goes, unknowing that the priest is now Dracula's slave. He goes to the priest and wants help. Hey, you got to help me, help me out. And so there's crosses and double crosses and back and forth. And eventually the priest decides to help him out. Like, Dracula's not this nice guy, so I'll help him out. So it eventually winds up that, before I get to that part, they do find Dracula in his coffin. So, of course, you need to drive a stake through Dracula's heart, which they do. But once you drive that stake in there, in this film anyway, you've got to say a prayer. But the priest has lost his faith, and Paul is an atheist. So, you can say all the prayers you want, they're not going to be any good.
Not going to work. Oh my God. So what, can he just pull the stake out if there's
he just pulls the stake out and he's ready to go again.
Man, I don't remember this film. I know I've seen it.
The stake was put in, but wait, there's more.
Right. It's
According
like,
to
this was not
articles-
the end. This was only like halfway through the movie. But anyway, eventually Dracula gets the niece and takes her up to his castle, has her remove the cross from the door, and then she throws it over this parapet, and it falls down, hits a few rocks, and of course it sticks in the ground straight up.
Oh,
And so
it's coming.
Paul, her boyfriend, arrives at the castle, and he and Dracula are fighting it out. And somehow he's able to get Dracula over that parapet. And he trips over the parapet, falls, and lands, boom, right on the cross. So the cross is basically impaling him, or he's impaled on the cross. And the priest, after seeing all of this and going through all of this, has regained his faith. So he sits there and says the Lord's Prayer in Latin, and Dracula eventually just turns to dust. And but there are other things that happen during the movie, but you have to watch it. I don't want to spoil the entire thing for you. But yeah, this movie, like I say, was right after was it Taste of Blood of Dracula. And I got a couple notes here, and I'm gonna have to put on my cheaters really quick. Freddie Francis actually directed the film. Terence Fisher, who had directed the previous films, had gotten into a car accident and broke his leg. So Freddie Francis took over. So the direction on this film is a little different than the others. And he also did something where he had the cameraman, Arthur Grant, use colored filters. So anytime Dracula's on the screen, or they show Dracula's castle, it's got a colored hue kind of around the image. Crimson, amber, and I think orange. So there was that. And the film was, this is the first one of the films that was actually filmed at Pinewood Studios, which is one of the most famous. I mean, the Bond films were shot there. Star Wars films were shot there. Everything was shot. Superman, I think the original Superman with Christopher Reeve shot scenes at Pinewood. So Hammer started using Pinewood, and this was the first one there. So they did not have the approach, or the road that approaches the castle. They did not have the coach path, and they did not have the moat. So they had to kind of shoot around those.
Why didn't they just?
The castle was like a model anyway, so
They didn't just go. I think previously it was at Bray, right? So they didn't just go back to Bray and shoot some of that stuff.
No, there's no more Bray at this point. Yeah, they were doing everything at Pinewood.
Okay.
And then one thing I saw was that Dracula and Dracula Prince of Darkness were both banned in Australia. Didn't make it past the censors. But for whatever reason, this film did pass the censors. And so it was like the first Dracula film to actually be released in Australia. It played for like 3 weeks at the Capitol Theatre in Sydney, but that was really about it.
Crikey.
However, supposedly it is Hammer's highest grossing film in the US. So take that for what it's worth.
I wonder why.
But it was an enjoyable film. There's no Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. I mean, everything is basically the trio, although they're not always working with each other. But the Monsignor, the priest, and Paul the Baker.
Paul the Baker.
That combined to bring down Dracula in this one.
We must destroy Dracula. We have the Monsignor, the priest, and the baker.
The baker had the garlic bread.
There you go. Cool.
But yeah, no, they add little things in all these movies. Like, I mean, I guess you were talking about the running water.
Mm-hmm.
They make a big thing about that he can be stopped with pure running water. Although they never really use that in the film. I guess I was just to explain what he was doing frozen in a stream. But
interesting.
Well, they came up with a lot of really inventive things. And some worked better than others because what is it? It wasn't in Dracula 1972. It was in Satanic Rites of Dracula, right? Where, what was it, like the holly branch or whatever pierced him through the heart or something, something really hokey, where it just seemed like, okay, he's got a twig that killed him. It was a little less like exciting, but yeah, they were always like trying to come up with ways other than somebody pounding a stake through his heart, I think.
Right, which makes sense, because I mean, if all it took was, going in there in the morning and just putting a stake in his heart.
Yeah.
But the thing that also got me watching some of these films is, if you're going to do that, you should do it like at noon, right in the middle of the day. They always wait until just before sunset and they go in there, and it's like they don't quite get it done in time, and oh, look, the sun's going down. Oh, we blew it.
Well, Jasmine had asked me when Dracula first appeared, and you see up the stairs and the wall, and the light goes click, 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 like someone turned off a light, and it went to dark. And she's like, why don't they, do this in the daylight? I'm like, dear, it would be a 10-minute movie then, I mean, that's the reality of it.
That's right. He comes walking down the stairs, hits the sunlight, poof, he's gone. End the movie.
But these are great. I'm hopeful that we can get back to Christopher Lee's portrayal of Dracula sooner rather than later on one of our future podcasts. It's a lot of fun. I know we're toying with the idea of getting into other Hammer monster movies, but I think there's some of the universals that we need to go back to, maybe. Anyway.
Well, I think
this
was fun, and I think the thing, like for me, like I mentioned before, is that the Hammer films, like the Universal movies, I could watch as a kid, but I always sympathized to some degree, maybe not with Dracula, but like with Frankenstein or the Wolfman, even the Mummy, or the Creature. I always had some sympathy for them. I always kind of, had a soft place in my heart for them and felt bad for them. The Hammer monsters, they just scared the shit out of me. And, the stuff going on in the Hammer movies, I know it probably seems like nothing today to people when they watch these films. The level of violence has escalated so much. But like, to be like an 8-year-old kid and to see like these women get staked and the blood spurting out and stuff, it was like, holy crap, it was really scary stuff.
And they screamed a lot too. So there was, there's a gravitas to it. They didn't just go, they were like, you're kind of like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, plus the actors they got. I mean, Christopher Lee, like we were mentioning, is well over 6 feet. Frankenstein, they got, well, Christopher Lee played the Frankenstein monster in one movie, but then you've got David Prowse in Horror of Frankenstein. And then even Oliver Reed, playing the werewolf in Curse of the Werewolf. They're all very imposing.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
And a lot of their stories, like this Dracula, you might be able to come up with some reason for Bela Lugosi's Dracula, although I think he was still pretty evil. But like this Dracula, he really is like satanic. He just, there's nothing about him where you feel like, oh, this poor guy. It's like, no, this guy scares the crap out of me. I don't want to be around him. I don't want to get him taking revenge on me and my family.
Right. And you grab the woman, you're like, stand behind me. You are the spawn of Satan, Dracula. And Christopher Lee with his bloodshot eyes just goes, mm-hmm. Are you going to bite me, Dracula? Will we survive the night?
I mean, some of the other films they made, I don't even remember what it was, but I remember being really small and watching, I think it was Vampire Circus. And there was some scene in Vampire Circus where I just remember getting up, turning the TV off, and like running into the other room where my folks were. I was like, nope, 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 nope.
A young walker just going, I'm out.
I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah, vampire films never really did it for me. Werewolves, though. I could always get scared by a good werewolf.
And I always thought werewolves were like dogs, and I love dogs, so they never scared me that much.
The American Werewolf in London scared me. The whole.
How about
vampires never really scared me. I always felt sorry for Frankenstein, and I'll tell you what scared me. And I know at some point we're going to talk about this. Was Penny Dreadful, the seance that they had, and she got possessed, and I was, as an adult, that was disturbing.
Well, Penny Dreadful was great because you could tell they took a lot of influence from the Universal stuff, but also Hammer. They really wove
and the books.
They wove a lot of different influences together.
Yeah, so. It's a fun series, and one of the best portrayals of the Frankenstein creature in my book. I mean, he's up there with Karloff, in my opinion. I mean, that guy is just phenomenal.
It's interesting because I've seen that actor now in a number of different roles. And there's a series on Netflix called The Diplomat, which, if you haven't seen it, is really good. And he plays the British Prime Minister. It's just so funny to see him in that role.
Well, it's like seeing, we're watching X-Files, and Jasmine calls, it's Scully and Mulder, but she calls them like Scully, Mulder, so Mully and Sculder or something like that. I can't remember. She switches it up. So she played the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in The Crown.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. That was interesting. But anywho, This was good. This was fun. We have to come back to this. This is our new version of the censor sweep, where we all kind of share something. But Karen, we're going to let you go first. You have something fun and fantastic. I'm
going to go first.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to do because I don't do it that much. So just going with the theme tonight of Hammer films, one of my favorite reference books for Hammer is this book by Sinclair McKay called A Thing of Unspeakable Horror, The History of Hammer Films. Not too much glare on it. You can actually see it here. This is a really nice paperback book that kind of goes chronologically and talks about the history of Hammer, how the studio came together, the people behind it. And then they also will talk about the different films as they go chronologically through what was happening at Hammer. And there's some nice photos and things in the book. But if you're interested in Hammer and how all those films came together and how the people worked together, I would recommend this book. It's a nice read. It's, almost 300 pages. I think I probably got this off Amazon, but I'm sure you could probably get it there. So highly recommend this book.
Nice. Chief, did you want to go next, or you want me to jump in?
Oh, I can jump in, I guess.
Okay.
Recently it's just on a whim, searching eBay, which I do quite often. I found from Thailand a Shin Ultraman popcorn bucket, which is kind of weird because if you look at it, it looks just like a bust of Ultraman.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how is that a popcorn bucket? Well, on the back, there's a little trap door, and you open that, and he's hollow inside. So I guess that's where you put it or eat the popcorn out of. But it's not like I'm going to be eating popcorn out of this thing. I just got it because it looked like a cool Ultraman bust.
Cool Ultraman bust.
Very nice.
And of course, in July, which I'm going to double check here because I'm screwing up all my dates lately. July 21st through the 23rd. We're, of course, doing Ultra Fest at the 4-Star Theater in San Francisco. And if you go to bayareafilmevents.com/Ultraman, we've got the whole list of films that we're showing. And we're going to be adding individual episodes to that, but we're waiting for approval. But we'll have some cool stuff there, some exclusives that you can only get at the show. And we'll have some giveaways and prizes and vendors and the whole shoot match.
Nice.
So check it out. Tickets will be going on sale soon. So if you keep an eye on bayareafilmevents.com or check out our Facebook page, we'll have announcements on all those. And you can also get on our mailing list and be the first to know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've been doing lately. Godzilla Fest will be coming up in August, but we'll get more into that as we get closer to that date.
Excellent. I was very fortunate. There is a company called The Shrunken Monkey, and I'm not sure if it's on Facebook or Twitter, but I know they're on Instagram. There is a convention that is held in Florida called Spooky Empire, and they just celebrated their 20th anniversary. Rico Browning, famously portraying the creature, had been to that convention for a number of times. Unfortunately, I never saw him there, never made it out there. But I put out a request on the interwebs. Please, 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 if anyone was going to Spooky Empire, pick up this year's tiki mug that is done by the Shrunken Monkey, an homage to the creature. And this tiki mug.
Very nice.
Very cool. I put out the same message on mine, but I had no friends going. So
beautifully.
I got nothing. I'll have to buy it for like $600 on eBay.
It's going for a pretty penny on eBay, but I guess mugs from years past. There's a Jason mug out there from Spooky Empire. The folks at Shrunken Monkey had a post on Instagram, and they were just so pissed at the resell. There was a limit of 2 mugs per person, and people are more than making money off of this, unfortunately. Anyway, last year's mug and the year before, the prices kind of come down. They don't come down to retail, which was $40, but you can avoid the $200 or $300. I don't know what it's going for on eBay right now, but I know they did have some on eBay. But anyway, it is a very cool tiki mug. Bob, I didn't get a chance to ask you. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 2 is coming out soon. Will you guys be going out to see it?
Oh, I'm sure we probably will. That's coming out. The Flash is coming out.
I'm hearing good things for Spider-Man.
Yeah.
What about you, Walker? I know you're definitely going to go see.
Yeah, I've got tickets for Spider-Man for this Saturday.
Excellent. I haven't gotten my tickets yet. Bob, I won't say why, Walker, I won't say why. I'm so excited about the Flash movie, but there's a certain superhero who's, going to be in it. And it's not the Flash, it's a friend of the Flash who's in another film that I really, really like. But again, I won't say. Honor.
Are you afraid it's going to start an argument?
It might.
About a certain movie?
Certain movie with 2 certain superheroes. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I was just going to say, before I got inundated, that I do have tickets on Monday for Shin Kamen Rider, which is a Fathom event. And it's actually playing tonight during this recording, but I'm here. So luckily there's a encore screening on Monday. So I'll be heading over there on Monday.
Nice. Glad you were able to get tickets for that show. I know it was kind of like, no.
Yeah. I don't know, everything's kind of going that way right now, but c'est la vie.
You're a busy man. I'm excited to say, and unfortunately I'm a couple of weeks late, but the 1970s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers is playing can't think of the name of the venue in Berkeley on a Wednesday next week. So I'll be going out there with some friends watching that. Fun fact, I've never seen that movie on the big screen.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think I have either.
Yeah.
I did when it first came out.
Bonus points if it was at a drive-in.
No, I think it was at a theater.
Oh. Still, I'm envious. And, one of the things I was telling Jasmine, now that Will doesn't do Thrillville up here anymore, that's where I would see like these obscure, well, I guess it's not obscure, but a lot of these movies that I'd otherwise watch, at home, streaming or on Blu-ray or DVD. So it's kind of cool that they're doing that.
Or you, a lot of the stuff Will would show, you might never see it anywhere because you might never have heard of it. I mean, that was sort of the beauty of the thing. Sometimes you knew what you were getting. It might be like, Jason and the Argonauts. It's like, oh yeah, I love this movie. And then the next time it might be something like Dolomite.
I was going to say, one of my fondest memories is Rudy Ray Moore's Dolomite, and just the shock of,
That was.
Did you see that movie, Bob?
No, I didn't.
No.
So
it's up there with Ganja and Hess.
It was an education.
That's not a ringing endorsement, by the way.
Yeah, well.
Well, anyway, my friends, this was a fun episode as always. Any last minute shout outs or thoughts on Hammer Dracula, Christopher Lee, or anything else?
We can do this again sometime. We have 4 more movies or 3 more movies to talk about.
We can pick up the rest. And I mean, like I said before, when we were planning it originally, I was really torn because I was also interested in doing Dracula 1972, and then wound up going with Prince of Darkness. But yeah, I could definitely see rounding out the rest of the films.
Yeah, I'd love to go back into it.
And Christopher Lee is just such a fascinating guy. When you look into his life and all the stuff he did, and he was in World War II. Apparently, he was working in intelligence and as an actual spy, and could speak, I think, like 8 different languages. And I mean, this was a guy who lived a larger than life and was also an actor. Just an amazing person.
Absolutely.
He could speak 8 languages, but still didn't want to speak in the Dracula. He could have made up some languages. Esperanto language in Dracula or something.
Esperanto would have been great.
Transylvanian Esperanto.
Well, my friends, and friends out in the interwebs who are watching us on YouTube and sharing it with your friends, remember, like, subscribe, and comment. Of course, we're out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everywhere fine podcasts are shared out on the internet. We appreciate you guys. We thank you for tuning in again, hanging out with us. Watch the films, or if you've watched them, let us know what some of your favorite moments were in the movies we discussed today. We always appreciate hearing from you guys. Stay safe, take care, peace out.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.
Hate it, but people still see you as the Prince of Darkness. Does this bother you?
Well, it's a fairly high rank.